this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. We're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on our website, leave us that Google review, and if you're watching on the socials, then get involved in the conversation below. Our email address for any discussion topics, hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. There's a podcast version of the show available every week from the podcast platforms you see on the other side of the screen. So let's get right to it and talk to our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Paul. Hi, and hello to all our viewers and listeners. Good program last week. Had a good feedback on that. So fingers crossed we can do something for you here again.
Yeah, very interesting first story this. Renters would be £2.6 million worse off over their lifetime compared to home owners. But many people are unsure if they want to get on the property ladder, a report has found. According to research from Yorkshire Building Society, which compared renting versus buying a home over the 55-year period from 33 to 88, a borrower would pay £367,000 in mortgage payments, while a renter would shell out £1.6 million in rent. However, the borrower would own a property worth around £1.7 million by the end of the period, while a renter would not have any asset at all, of course. The Mutual added that around £960,000 of the renter's £2.6 million additional spend would be from continued rental payments over the 20 years after retiring at 68. But the buyer would not have, of course, additional accommodation costs. The buyer would also have the option to release capital from their home to support their retirement or pass wealth on to family or friends. It's an interesting but absolutely mind-blowing figure, I think. £2.6 million worse off if you rent all of your life rather than if you own a property. Obviously, that asset at the end of it is the big differential in these equations and in these sums. But that's probably a good reason why people want to get on the property ladder, I would suggest.
That's an amazing headline grabber, isn't it, Paul? But, the public and the media and the press would never, ever want to see that go on there because they wouldn't want to hurt the buy-to-let or the rental market. And of course, house prices will shoot up through the roof because everybody will start thinking, well, actually, how is it that I can quickly go out there and start to buy? I'd rather be a landlord. I'd rather be a homeowner. And from an agent's point of view, I think that's music to my ear. I have always said, and on our program for these years that we've done it, and any time that if anybody at any one time can get onto the housing ladder, that is the best step that they'll ever take towards not just owning a home, but potentially having some security for the future. I'm not against renters, and I'm not against the fact that landlords should rent. But here is a clear stat of why somebody should really think about buying their own home. And that's part of the UK policy, isn't it? That's what we grow up with. We know that it's, ideally and ultimately the thing to do is to buy your own home. It's just the fact that some people are not in a position to, or don't have the infrastructure, or don't have the support or the family support in order to be able to achieve those goals. But I think, this headline is an amazing headline for those that want to buy or get on the housing ladder. And if there was the same headline was in the Telegraph or in the Sun, you all of a sudden the people will start thinking, well, actually, I've got to find a way to go and buy my first home, as opposed to start to rent, because I don't want to be poor. I want to be rich. I want to have the benefit of that, not paying the amount of rent to somebody else's benefit. But I want to do that. But I'm not saying that that's not be the case for some people. Some people are just not in a position to do that, which I understand that. But I'm just saying that generally it's a great headline grabbing for those that want to buy.
Well, despite the astonishing headline, apparently more people than ever are unsure if they want to buy a home. Further research from Yorkshire Building Society found that around a fifth of 18 to 34-year-olds and 3/5 of those aged 35 to 54 are uncertain if they will ever buy a home and are not planning to do so at all. 3/5 of 35 to 54s. That's really interesting. When asked what barriers were preventing prospective first-time buyers from getting onto the property ladder, the level of financial commitment of a house, affordability and the high cost of living were cited as key factors. Just under half said the cost of living was preventing them from buying their first home, and 43% said they were delaying a house purchase due to high prices. Around half said they felt overwhelmed by the current market, so they've stopped looking for a property to buy. It's quite interesting, that, isn't it? So people are just looking at it thinking, my goodness, the price is just getting bigger and bigger. I'm not even going to make myself get that depressed.
It's true that does become a challenge, but also the thing that really makes the difference, Paul, is the mobility. The fact that that age group is now more mobile in terms of where their life is going to be, what type of life they want, whether it's a city life, a country life, another country altogether life. All of those things, being the advent of the mobile, smartphone, iPad, internet, has allowed people to say that, well, actually, if they buy something, they might be tied down to an area which is they're perhaps not ready to get tied down to. It's the same as, commitment of marriage and things like that. It's moved further down the line when people used to get married perhaps younger because they wanted to create an infrastructure or family. Now it's the case of, well, actually, I can afford to go to somewhere in Europe. I want to do this. People are traveling a lot. So that tied down commitment of owning a property perhaps is one of the main reasons, apart from all the others, that people think, well, actually, I'm not ready now. But sometimes it's too late to be ready. And that's what they've got to bear in mind, that if they are doing a 34, 35, 40-year age time to get a mortgage, you have to remember that the normal mortgage time is 25 years. Some are now doing longer. And so the body clock, the age clock doesn't stop ticking. At the age of 40, you've got till 65 for a mortgage, and you may not be, and much later you become even lesser of an attraction for someone that's going to lend you money on a property, and you have to have a sufficient amount of deposit. So people actually perhaps don't look at that side of it because we never think we're going to get old, but the reality is the computer says no, comes into my mind when people say, actually, I want to borrow money now and I'm at the age of 40, 45 and I can't get more than 20 years. That's because that's the system. And that system means that you may not be able to afford. So whilst it might be something that people think, well, I don't want to do, I would urge them strongly to reconsider their thought and step on, even if it's a smaller property, because later in life you will realize that perhaps you should have bought.
They say that over half of prospective home buyers, not surprisingly, don't want to waste money on the rent. That's their main reason for wanting to buy. According to research of 1,000 prospective first-time buyers looking to buy in the next 3 years, more than half of people said they wanted to buy and not waste money on rent. This was the most popular reason among the 35, 44-year-olds and 45 to 54-year age brackets at 64% and 67% respectively. Respondents also pointed to the freedom of living how they want to live, wanting to start a family and adding security and retirement. Approximately 69% said they would consider extending their mortgage term to make it more affordable, and 83% they would try and pay off lump sums to make the mortgage more affordable. Around 37% of prospective first-time buyers said housing and house prices were third on their list of national priorities behind economy, health and NHS. So you've got the economy first, the health and the NHS, the health service basically is the second priority for these people, and then house prices are the third. And we've often thought that certainly in an election period or in any sort of political discussion, that house prices and the property market are such an important factor. But when you see it's the third priority for people who ultimately vote these people in, and yet it seems to sit so far down in the list of priorities for any political party.
It does, because from a political point of view, the mess they create with the NHS and other aspects is probably more in your face than the house prices. It's not until you settle down and you've got the right or the wrong parties in, you begin to realize it's now hurting your pocket. And it's not until you start hurting your pocket, you realize that perhaps really the focus should be your property and whether your investments are right. But yes, I hear that obviously things like the NHS, and I think the NHS is very important to have. We're very lucky to have the NHS, and I think the system is often abused for what it is, and perhaps blamed by wrong management of people that are actually running surgeries and so forth. But I think the reason why we do what we do here is that ultimately, if you have no base, if you have no income, you have no security, then the rest of it doesn't start to stack up. And yes, in an election year, perhaps housing market may be falling at the third place. But once the elections have settled down, it tends to come to the first place, primarily because then people start to realize that it's affected. For example, we've seen in the last year, 12, 14 months, 14 rises of interest rates, 14 consecutive rises of interest rates. That had no bearing on whether it was the NHS or anyone else. It started to really affect the people's personal pockets. And that's what made the difference. They started to say, well, hang on a minute, I can't afford this, but I want to be part of this. Did that stop people still buying going forward? If you look at the statistics, the house prices came down for about 1.5%. They went back up again because people still want to buy, and it's still the best place and the best investment they can do. But I think, yes, there are other things that take format and front seat when perhaps choosing circumstances, your house does come at the top of the list.
They say the potential loss of faith in the idea of home ownership, these latest figures are the most stark yet, saying that people are just saying, do you know what, I'm not even going to bother with it because I just don't think I'm ever going to be able to afford it. And they're saying that coupled with their lifetime analysis of what this means for anyone who has to settle for long-term renting shows just how big an issue it is for the UK right now. And the respondents have seconded their priority, saying that it is assigned to housing. So what they're saying is that they're basically saying they believe it's a home ownership is a basic right, and they're a building society, of course, but they're saying that basic right is being taken further and further away from them. So they're presenting apparently a policy paper to Parliament, apparently, calling for a joined-up industry approach at fixing what's wrong with the housing market, involving lenders, the government and other industry bodies. It'll be an interesting discussion. What do you think they need to fix first, Joe?
I think they just need to just do their jobs properly, and that will fix a lot of things instead of spending a lot of time taking reports and analysis and sitting around tables and discussing something that's not broken really, but they want to break it, and it's not there. This is far too old, far too long. And it was there before I was around, and it'll be there long after I'm gone. And these people can spend their life sitting around tables discussing how to fix something that really isn't broke, but it's only broke because they've actually broken it in their own system. So that's my answer to that. And the answer to that is that let them get on with the job that they're all doing, and we might get somewhere instead of keep talking about it.
The fact of the matter is there's more and more people who are just saying, do you know what, I'm not even interested because the amount of years I'm going to have to spend paying back money to people, and I'm not going to be able to afford to have any kind of quality of life. That must be of concern. And I guess the other thing, of course, is that if you do decide to rent for your entire lifetime, then you're going to rely on a strong private rental sector. And there's obviously the questions we've been raising over the last few weeks about that. So what does the government do you think, in terms of the private rental sector? Should they make it become all corporate landlords, or should it be a fully funded and invested private industry as well as corporates?
We live in a democratic society, and I think that it's right for everyone to do what they feel is right by their personal circumstances. And I don't think it's up to the government to direct that. However, the government directs it because it's where their pockets are lined, who lines their pocket, and who keeps them in government. So corporates obviously are more powerful. And at the moment, there's a lot of corporates that are looking to become institutional landlords because it makes good sense for them. That doesn't necessarily mean that there are smaller landlords that also want to be part and want to grow towards being a corporate landlord. Rental will never go away because there's always going to be a percentage of people that can't afford to buy. But if you look at the stark figures at the headline of this particular show, you should tell everybody that it's important for them to try and get onto the housing market, onto the housing ladder. The pain is lesser for owning than it is for just renting, because you're paying a lot of money in rent over a period and actually have nothing else to show for it at the end. So it's not a unrealistic decision to consider. But of course, it's considered based on their personal circumstances. So each one to have their own decision. But I don't think the government should be making any directions. I think it should be a direction where the people and the people power has to come into that and say that, this is what we want.
They make the very good point, of course, that the government seems to be forcing landlords out of the market with all the things that we've discussed recently. And that's not helpful for people who want to rent or can't buy, as you say. And they need affordable properties to allow them to hopefully save up at the same time. They say from a lender's perspective that the industry needs more products and more innovation and more support, and additional support was needed from government. They talk about things like help to buy should be brought back as soon as possible across all property types, not just new builds. Is that something we think we're going to see from the Labour government?
The problem with the help to buy is that it is just doable easily with the new builds. And that's the reason. I think it should be across the board. But I understand why it's not across the board. It's only with the new builds because the developer plays a part with the government from the outset. So it's a lot easier to manipulate a structure, a buyable structure, than it is with someone who has a second-hand home. So, for example, if you're selling your home or I'm selling my home, and I want to help somebody with a buy to let property or a help to buy scheme, where we have to participate in the deposit process. Now, if you've got good equity in your property, you may be in a position to help, and it becomes part of an investment. But if you don't, and you're reliant on the equity, the sale of your property to purchase your next one, you're not going to be in a position to turn around and help anybody with a deposit. Whereas with the developer and the builder and the government, because they're starting it out afresh, they can take a portion of their profit. And what the government then says is, well, if you help us on the help to buy scheme and put 10%, keep 10% in the system, we'll probably give you that as a tax relief or some other relief somewhere else. So there's a gain, and it works, but it doesn't work necessarily unless there is enough equity within a private sale.
Well, staying with the first-time buyers, I can now reveal the top 10 hotspots for first-time buyers around the country. And at a national level, Manchester is now the country's most popular location for first-time buyers outside of London. This is from new research. At a national level, first-time buyers account for around half, 49% of all homes bought with the mortgage, although in the most popular areas for the first-time buyers, that figure jumps to as high as 75%. New research based on data from Halifax House Price Index analysed the areas of the country outside London where first-time buyers account for the biggest proportion of home sales. Despite a housing market characterised in recent years by high property prices and more expensive borrowing costs, these first-time buyer hotspots are proving resilient, with a number of factors driving the popularity, a study found. So here's the figures, and I can reveal that Manchester has 75% of first-time buyers with an average price of £212,891. Which is not too bad, I guess, when you compare it to the number 2, which is Slough, which has 73% of percentage of first-time buyers, and the average price in Slough, £322,961 for a first-time buyer, Joe. So Manchester, it looks like we're all going to have to go up north to afford a first-time house.
Yes, it's a long way to go up north to get, a first-time buyer home, but it's a step on the run of the ladder, and I think it's crucial that it gives the opportunity for every buyer, first-time buyers, to get onto the housing ladder. Of course, the nearest to London is going to be Slough and perhaps Reading, I think, a bit further down, and other areas that are allowed. But certainly for every first-time buyer, when you think you can purchase properties, anything from, I think, 75, 80,000 pounds upwards, in the north around Manchester, not necessarily the city, but generally around Manchester area, then I think it's a great step and a great opportunity for first-time buyers to get onto that run of the property ladder.
Yeah, Manchester 212,000 is 35,000 below the British average. Second on the list, Slough in Berkshire, which has become the increasingly popular location for first-time buyers in the south. who represented 73% of all properties purchased with a mortgage last year, was up from 54% in 2020. So that's quite a big jump, almost 20% growth in first-time buyers in Slough, and similarly a 10% growth in Manchester. And I guess if you're prepared to be mobile and look at other parts of the country, then this could solve your first-time buyer a problem rather, because if you look at the northwest, Knowsley, 157,139 is the cheapest first-time buyer property. And then you've got Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, 172,554, and Samwell in the West Midlands, 179,000, well below, of course, some 40-odd thousand below the £221,000 average in the West Midlands. So there are bargains to be had, but I guess you've got to make some serious considerations in all of that. What would be your advice?
Well, my advice is about the jobs more than anything else. If you can get the right kind of employment, right infrastructure for your family, and it works, then Manchester is a great place to be. It's like another hub for London. But the reality is, the mindset always says that it's about where you go and is the distance too far. I mean, 3 or 4 hours traveling time can actually put a hole in the whole situation. And with that in mind, then you've got other places like Reading and Slough, which are just outside and not far from those. And I'm sure you can find some decent bargains. But my advice, as always, would be wherever possible, try and get onto the first rung of the housing ladder and make sure that you're part of the journey and not excluded.
Do you think that, and actually I moved many years ago up to just south of Manchester, fun enough, to Sandbach, more of a junction on the M6 than a town. But that property, I remember buying for 107,000, and I think we sold it 3 years later for 145. But the interesting thing is, and the point I was going to make is that generally speaking, people have said to me at the time, "Oh, you mustn't move up north because you're going to lose out from being in the south because the property prices increase more significantly in the south than they do in the north." And certainly, when we tried to come back and rebuy in the south, it was a lot more painful than the other way around.
Oh, guaranteed. That's always the case. The minute you step out of your comfort zone in the south, either you're doing it permanently. It's all about what part of time of life you're going to be doing that at. If it's a first time buyer purchase, then it's a good start because you're basically stepping out to come back in, and you may not come back in with the same size of accommodation, but you may make a little bit of capital, save some money, and then come back, create a credit history and come back to the south. But once you leave the south and go into the north or anywhere outside the M25, the stockbroker belt, all the hometowns, you will begin to realize that coming back becomes extremely expensive, and almost not in a position to buy. I mean, I've lived through and spoken about this example hundreds and hundreds of times when a couple of spinsters of a village decided to move to Bournemouth, Poole actually, and didn't get comfortable, didn't settle, but they moved out of Sunning Hill and sold their cottage for a handsome sum, bought something outside, didn't like it, wanted to come back, and simply couldn't afford it. Because what you have to base that on is the costs as well. The cost of purchasing, the cost of selling. This is all dead money that you have just got to spend to move that, make that move, stamp duty, etc. All of those costs start to come in, and that's what eats up the profit, if there is any, or perhaps the loss, if there is going to be a loss. So yeah, be careful when and how you do that. But as a first-time buyer, which is what this is about, I would definitely endorse them stepping on the ladder wherever they possibly can.
Yeah, because I guess their objective is just to get on the ladder. It doesn't really matter how much growth there is. There'll be growth, but if it isn't as much as it would have been in the south, they wouldn't have been able to afford that anyway. So I guess from that point of view, it's just all about getting onto the ladder in the first place. Final story this week is an interesting one that I just wanted to go back and relive an old time with you, Joe. Shares in Rightmove rose sharply yesterday on confirmation of a bid interest from an Australian rival majority owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. REA or REA Group announced on Monday morning that it was going to consider a takeover proposal to create a globally focused real estate company. Any bid any bid would likely comprise of cash and shares. No approach has been made to date, REA said, which is also being confirmed by Rightmove. REA is 61% owned by News Corporation, which has existing UK interests, including The Sun and The Times, of course, brands under the company's News UK arm. Shares in Rightmove valued at almost 4.4 billion as of last week, jumped 27% to 708p when the FTSE 100 closed for business last Monday, taking them to the highest level in 2.5 years. However, their stock fell, REA's stock fell about 8%. I just want to take you back, because this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because at one time, of course, News UK, the News UK arm of that company, the News Corporation company, would have owned national newspapers, which would have been full of property advertising. As you've mentioned many times in the past, local newspapers used to have a huge section, and often it was a separate newspaper that was within the main newspaper. And of course, all that's gone to the internet. So it kind of makes sense for Murdoch, because you'd think on the face of it, well, hang on a minute, why is a news company wanting to buy Rightmove? Well, it's really getting the opportunity to earn revenue from what they used to have, I guess.
Well, yes. I mean, look, first and foremost, the property news, that was our local paper, was a paper that was created by all the local agents, because all the time it was always a fight between perhaps the two local papers, which was like the Observer and the Slough Express at the time. And each year, each quarter, they will, fight for the property section. And the reason why they do that is, apart from the news that people want to look at, people actually bought the paper to go straight to the property section to see what was available on the market, what's new, what can they buy, etc. So the property never ever has left the focus of the people that are showing interest. I remember that the property news used to arrive Wednesday night, early hours of the morning, and people will actually, on their way to work, rip it open to see if they could get a first glance at what's come on the market that week, because Thursday morning they had the phone to start ringing. And that all went to pop when people like Rightmove came along with a coalition of all the bigger agents. Again, power always grows with the big people, the Connells, the Mann and Co's, and so forth, got together, Countrywide got together and created Rightmove, bought shares into Rightmove and did very well out of it. Rightmove is now, one of the last stats that I saw, was worth £5.4 billion as an operation. And they charge a lot of money, exorbitant amount of money, because they're a captured audience, and others have obviously tried to become Rightmove, but it was one of the first ones that went into that market and took control. And they have a mechanism that works very, very well for these people. But the reality of it all is that when you look at the situation with Murdoch and the property papers, yes, of course, it is important to understand that people are looking at the importance of property as being part of the overall. So the media, the news media, wants and needs the property aspect, and Murdoch is right to perhaps consider that. And then followed by that will be other people that will look at the other aspects of it, because people do go to that. So when they look at the Murdoch papers, they will start to tag the right move aspect of that. So people will say, okay, well, I'm looking at the Telegraph, whatever he owns now, and then I can click on to Rightmove, or I can be on Rightmove and click onto the newspaper side of it. So it's a combination of the two, perhaps coming together in the modern way, like it used to, as you say.
Do you think, with all the technology change from the newspapers to today, do you think we've got a better way of finding a house to buy from both sides, both the estate agent and the customer?
I think the experience is very different. Better, I'm not really sure. I think there is a level of localism in each area that you can't take away. And people like Rightmove, Zoopla on the market are become more global. So people do go there And the next generation, and this is where generation comes into it, old and new, next generation is tech savvy. That's what they understand and that's what they believe in. So for them, it is definitely the right way to look at it. Not necessarily that they would get the problem with being tech is that you can get defrauded quite easily. There's lots of people that come into this thing and perhaps they're not any good at it, but they think, well, this is my moment. I can try and sneak into this. Whereas the touchy feely, the picking up the property newspaper, the local paper, the national paper with the property aspect of it was perhaps a bit more real because there was a lot of real time gone into putting something together. Even today, when I'm putting stuff together to put onto the internet, we have a system that allows us to do that. But there are lots of people that can create those systems now, Paul, to make that happen. And the reality is some of that true, or is it some of that false? Is it misleading? Whereas we know when I was doing it with Property News or the Observer and so forth, we literally, apart from originally, I'm sure you'll remember this just as much as I do, we used to have to stick the pictures on a square to show them which part it was going to go to, so that's what went to the print shop to do it.
Yep.
So there was a lot of realism in the whole of that Blue Peter process, if you want to call it that. But now the danger is, are you getting what you really are looking for?
Well, it'll be very interesting to see if that takeover does go ahead, and indeed where Murdoch and his team will take that company. Fascinating, and even where we will be with the whole property portal situation in the next 10 years. That's one of those things, of course, we will keep an eye on here at Property Matters, and we'll be back very soon with another show for you on Property Matters.